Hello, and welcome to another lesson in our series from the book of Judges. In this lesson, we will be looking at the birth of Samson, and then in the final lesson from the book of Judges, we'll be looking at Samson's delivering of the Israelites from the Philistines. As we've mentioned before now, the book of Judges is a history book. It covers the history of Israel from the time of Joshua's death until the time of the birth of Samuel. And of course, it will be through Samuel that God establishes the monarchy for the nation of Israel. It is during this 350-year period or so of history that the book describes several cycles that seem to occur again and again and again in this period when Israel had no king. The cycles were something like this. The Israelites would begin to worship the gods of their neighbors. Yahweh would give them over to their neighbors, give their neighbors the ability to conquer, to defeat, to oppress the Israelites. The Israelites would live a period of time in suffering. They would cry out to God. God would hear them, and out of his grace, he would raise up one who would deliver them from the suffering at the hands of their neighbors. And these that he raised up, we call judges. Now, as we mentioned before, that the book mentions 6 minor judges. That is, there are 6 names that are given to us, and they're only in a single verse or 2-verse reference. And then there were 6 names that were given to us that goes into more description about who they are and the role they played in delivering Israel from the hands of their neighbors. Samson is one of these 6 major judges that we call them, where more is told about his life and what happened. But again, what would happen in this cycle is they would worship the other gods, they would be suffering oppression, God would raise up a judge, and then God would deliver the Israel from their neighbors, just as he promised he would. And then as long as that judge was alive, Israel would worship Yahweh and things would be fine. Then when that judge died, the next generation came along. They went right back to worshiping the gods of their neighbors. And this happened again and again and again. This cycle is repeated over and over and over again. Now, as I said, today we're going to be looking, and in this lesson, only at the birth of Samson, and focus our attention more on his mother and father than on Samson himself. Now, the oppressors, the neighbors this time, are the Philistines. So let's talk a little bit about the Philistines before we get into our lesson. The Philistines are a people who descended from Ham, one of the sons of Noah. They originally lived on the island of Crete, which is the largest of the Greek islands located there in the Mediterranean Sea. They then migrated to Cyprus, which is another large island in the Mediterranean Sea. It is located some 40 miles off the southern shore of Turkey and some 60 miles, 60 miles from the shore of the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. That is the coastline on the east end of the Mediterranean Sea. You go 60 miles out and you come to the island of Turkey. They lived there for a while, and then they moved from the island to the shore along the coastline on the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. It is estimated that this movement to the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea was somewhere in the 1600 to 1500 BC time period. Now, to put this in perspective, the Exodus, we believe, we can date approximately 1440, 1441 BC. So the point I'm making is the Philistines have migrated all the way over to the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea prior to the arrival of Joshua and the children of Israel. They lived in 5 major cities along that coastline. Those 5 cities were Gaza, Gath, Ekron, Ashdod, and Ashkelon. Each of these cities had their own king. So there were 5 separate city-states, if you will, each with their own king. And we see these names of these cities again and again throughout the history of Israel, because the Philistines serve as a thorn in the life of Israel for quite a period of time. In fact, we're going to see that Samson does not totally destroy the Philistines. In fact, the Philistines are still going to be the ones that cause problems for Saul. And it is King David who finally puts the Philistine threat to rest. We're told that they continued to play a role in this area of the world. We know from Isaiah's writing that the Assyrians were fighting with the Philistines as they attempted to take over the whole eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. And then Herodotus, the Roman historian of the 1st century, he says that the Philistines were still causing problems for the Israelites or for the Jews down as late as the period of the Maccabees. So the Philistines there when the Israelites arrived, and continually playing a role in the history of Israel, usually as an antagonist. Some people, some historians, attempt to date the time of Samson and say that his lifetime was somewhere in the 1150 to 1100 BC time period. Okay, with that in mind, let's begin our lesson, and we're looking in Judges chapter 13. Judges chapter 13, let's read the first few verses. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Okay, this cycle is continuing. They are doing evil in the sight of the Lord. What is that evil? They're worshiping these other gods. They are violating the commandments that God gave them in Sinai. They're worshiping the other gods. Now, as we read through these verses, continue to notice that the word Lord there is spelled with capitals, so we can read Yahweh in there. The God of Abraham, the God of Moses, the God that delivered them through the dried Red Sea, the God that destroyed the Egyptian army, the God that took care of them in the wilderness, the God who led Joshua across the Jordan River, the God who gave them the city of Jericho, the God who has driven out the tribes so they could settle in this promised land. This is Yahweh. This is Yahweh. And again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of Yahweh. So Yahweh delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Remember, we've already established that Yahweh has decided not to simply remove all these tribes, but he would leave these neighboring tribes there as a test of Israel's faith. And once again now, Israel has failed that test, and they have done in the eyes of Yahweh. Verse 2, a certain man of Zorah named Manoah, from the clan of the Danites, had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, you are sterile and childless, but you're going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Let's stop there. As I said, the cycle is repeated. Now, 40 years they've been under oppression of the Philistines. Now, what we're told here is about the Samson's father, Manoah. Now, the tribe has settled in the tribe of Judah has settled in this area between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean coast, but the Philistines are along the coast. The tribe of Dan is just to the west of Judah, And that tribal area, the land that was given to Dan, in part runs all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. However, just south of the area occupied by Dan is in fact the area that the Philistines occupy. So the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Judah are neighbors to these areas occupied by the Philistines. Zorah is a town that is located 13 miles west of what would be known later as Jerusalem. In other words, Jerusalem, or the area that would become Jerusalem, is in Judah. Okay? 13 miles away is the city of Zorah. Now, Zorah is on the border there between Judah and Dan and the Philistines. The city is 15 miles east of Ekron. Now, Ekron is one of those 5 major cities of Philistia. Okay? So this area of Dan is between Judah and the Philistines, and this is where this man Manoah lives. Manoah, the name means rest or repose. So this would be a name of hope, one who is going to have rest, going to have peace. And we're told he's of the clan of the Danites. He is of the tribe of Dan, living in the city in Dan, which is not very far from Jerusalem, Judah, not very far from Ekron, the Philistines. Again, the Philistines, though, have the area of Dan and Judah under their control, and they're oppressing them. Now, it's interesting here. It says that he has a wife who was sterile and remained childless. We're not told her name. We're not told her name, only that she's the wife of Manoah and that she is sterile and childless. Now, up until this time, there have been 3 matriarchs of Israel. There have been 3 females that were known throughout Israeli history, that the people of Israel knew their names and knew their stories. We're talking about Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel. And all 3 of them had been sterile and childless. But God revealed to us their names. And we know the stories in each of those cases. God gave them a child. Subsequent to this, we're going to have another matriarch of the nation. That, of course, would be Hannah. She was childless, but God gave her a child, but we knew her name. What I'm getting at is it's interesting that God uses these circumstances. Now think about it. The circumstance of a wife in this day and time, in this culture, the circumstance of a wife who was sterile, childless. The glory of the wife was she was to give her husband children, especially male children. And she has not been able to fulfill that role. This is a disgrace. This is would bring despair for the role of a wife. And so we've got this unnamed woman who is suffering this disgrace. And as I said, we don't even know her name. With these others, we knew her name. God used an unlikely person to accomplish his will. He's going to do it again. And it's not important who her name is. The important part here is that she, under these circumstances, is going to be used by God to accomplish his purpose. Well, what are we told about her? The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you're going to conceive a son." God brings a message to her. Now, we're told, the narrator tells us, the author tells us, that this was an angel of Yahweh, an angel of the Lord. She is probably going to see him, because based on a later description, she sees him as a man. She sees him as a man who is delivering a message from God, but it's not clear that she fully recognizes him as an angel at this time. We're told he was an angel, but he comes in the form of a man, and he gives her this message. First of all, he knows about her condition. Okay? that would indicate to her, tell her he's got a supernatural insight. And then he gives her the prophecy, the prediction that she's going to have a son. That would show her that he must be a man of God. He must be at least someone sent by God to bring her this message. And then the man gives her some instructions. Her instructions were that she was not to drink wine or any fermented drink. Okay? She was not to eat anything unclean. She was not to defile herself in any way, as the Israelites understood that from the law given to them at Mount Sinai, that she would no way was to defile herself. And she was going to give birth to a son. And that no razor would be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. So this person must be from God, who has his prediction she's going to have a son, who has his prediction that this son is going to be used by Yahweh to begin the delivery of Israel from the hands of the Philistines, and that he is to be set apart to God by some special rules called the vow of the Nazirite. The vow of the Nazirite. He says, you, since this young man, this boy's son is going to be a Nazirite from birth, you should not drink any wine. You should not defile yourself in any way. And then once you give birth to this son, he is going to continue with the Nazirite vows, and that means you should never cut his hair. You should never let a razor touch his head. Now, the Nazirite vow is described back over in Numbers chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. This again was when God was giving Moses the law, and he included in there the special status that one could choose to be set apart to God. And he says, when you take this vow, when you agree to set yourself apart unto Yahweh, this is how you should live. And there were certain abstentions that you had to follow. One, you were not to drink wine, any fermented drink, or eat any product from the grapevine, grapes, etc. Number two, you were never to cut your hair. There should be no razor touching your head. And number three, there should not be any contact with any deceased body, animal or man. In other words, you should not defile yourself in any way. Now, it seems that a person could choose to be a Nazirite either temporarily or for his lifetime. Temporarily, 30 days, 60 days, and during that time he wouldn't drink any wine, any fermented drink, wouldn't eat anything from the vine, would not defile himself in any way, and would not cut his hair. However, after that temporary period was over, he would go back to his normal lifestyle, cutting his hair, drinking wine, etc. However, some would choose to be a Nazirite for life, and that means for the rest of their life they would follow these restrictions. In this case, the message to her is her son is to be a Nazirite from birth. Now, she would be familiar with the Nazirite vow. Being a Israelite, she would know of the law that God had given to them at Mount Sinai. Her husband would know of the law that God had given to them at Mount Sinai. And they would be aware what it would mean that this child would be a Nazirite from birth. They would be aware what that means. So the promise to her is she's going to have a son. And the instruction is you are to prepare yourself so that as you carry that fetus will have been a Nazirite from birth. That is, no influence of wine or the grapevine, and no defilement that would have come to him prenatal, in that prenatal status. So she has received these instructions that this is what she should do in preparation for this child and in preparation for the birth of this child. And the promise is He is going to begin the delivery. He is going to begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistine. Verse 6, then the woman went to her husband and told him, a man of God came to me. Now see, she describes him as a man of God. Man of God is usually a word that refers to a prophet. A prophet is simply one who speaks for God, one who is carrying a message for God. So she has seen him as a man, and he's carried a message from God. The fact that he knows her condition without her telling him, the fact that he promises her she's going to have a son, that's beyond the natural expectation, and then gives her instructions about setting aside this child as separate unto God. He's a man of God. So she said, see, this man of God is coming. Now, interesting thing here, culturally, this would be a difficult conversation. Culturally, a stranger, male, should not have any conversation with the female. There should be no conversation at all. And she's acknowledging to her husband, this man, but hold on, he's a man of God. He's a man of God because of these other things. I know he is because of these other things. This man of God has come to me. He looked like an angel. Now she says, the more I think about it, his countenance, there was something about him. He was awesome. That's what it says. He looked like an angel of God. Very awesome. She says, now to think about it, he looked like an angel. But I didn't ask. She said, I didn't ask him where he came from. I didn't ask him to tell me his name. She was so struck by the fact he knew about her condition. She was so struck by the fact he promised her she was going to have a child. She was so struck by all of this, she didn't even think to ask him where he was from. That might help determine whether he was an angel or a prophet. Or anything about him. She didn't ask any questions at all. Didn't ask his name. She says, now that I look back, he may have been an angel, but listen to that message. He said to me, listen to what he told me. You will conceive and give birth to a son. Now then, drink no wine or other unfermented drink. Do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazarite of God from birth until the day of his death. She says, this is repeating what the angel has said to her, but she's telling her husband. He looked like an angel. He's obviously a man of God, and I didn't ask him any questions, and this is the message he gave me. I'm going to have a son, and he is to be a Nazarite from birth. So I am, during the pregnancy, not to violate any of the Nazarite vow, even as I carry this child in my womb. She was just so filled with joy that she was going to have a child, and she's sharing this with her husband. Let's look at his response down in verse 8. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, O Lord, I beg you, let the man of God you sent to us come again to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born. His response is a prayer. Now, it's interesting. The commentators interpret this prayer two different ways. Some suggest that Manoah has heard his wife's message with skepticism. First of all, they're suggesting he may have been upset that she acknowledges she's talking to another man. But some suggest that he is skeptical because he says, I want to hear this for myself. God, if it was really you who sent a man to my wife, send him again. Send him again so he can tell me. Now, it's interesting, those who suggest this say he was diplomatic enough, though, not to acknowledge his own skepticism. He's diplomatic to say, send the man back again to tell us how to raise him. But the instructions were pretty clear. The instructions was he's to be raised as a Nazarite. That's pretty clear instructions. So some suggest that he is disguising his skepticism by suggesting he wants further information that his wife's already told him, but he's saying, how about telling me how to raise his son. Now, that's those who see this prayer as a prayer of a skeptic. Others suggest that he is sincerely asking God for instructions, that he does believe his wife. And they suggest that, look at the prayer. He says, I beg of you, let the man you sent come to us and teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born. That is, he's, by his prayer, is acknowledging that there's going to be a son. He has accepted the truth that there's going to be a son, and now he wants further information. So they suggest this is not the prayer of a skeptic, but this is a prayer of one who has heard his wife's report, believes what his wife has said, and now, based upon the fact he's going to be a father, which he's never been before, and he's going to have a son who has been given a daunting task to begin the delivery of Israel from the Philistines. He says, I need help. So whether he was a skeptic or a believer, let you decide. But he prays, God, send the angel again. Send the man of God again. And give us further instructions how to raise this child. After all, you have said he's going to have a very significant task. We need to raise him so that he is ready for that task. Give us further instructions. And what happens? Verse 9. God heard Manoah. And the angel of God came again to the woman while she was out in the field. That's kind of God's humor, maybe. He heard Manoah pray. What did Manoah pray? Send him again to us. And God answered the prayer. How? By sending the angel again while she was out in the field and her husband was not with her. Now, he's answered the prayer. And the woman immediately runs to get her husband. Now, we still don't know her name. She immediately runs to get Manoah. She hurried to tell her husband, he's here, the man who appeared to me the other day. Now, again, she calls him a man. He's in the appearance of a man. She said, the man of God, the prophet, the one who knew my condition supernaturally, the one who has promised me a son, the one who has instructed us to raise our son unto God, separate unto Yahweh. He's come again. Come and meet him. Come and see him. Manoah got up and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said, are you the one who talked to my wife? Kind of interesting. She came and got him and said, this is the man. Now, Manoah prayed, send the man again. She comes and said, the man's here again. So he goes up and he asks, are you the one? It's kind of an interesting conversation there. He says, are you the one? And the angel says, yes, I am. Notice how Manoah then speaks to him. He says, when your words are fulfilled, what will be the rule for the boy's life and work? Now again, I'd suggest to you that Manoah believed his wife. He believed what God told his wife, and he believed what his wife told him that the angel had said. Because he immediately starts off and he says, when what you said comes true, I believe what you said is going to come true. And I'm concerned because you're saying that my son is going to have this very special role. What then should be the rule of his life? Interesting the way that we don't, it doesn't come out as clearly in the English as it does supposedly in the Hebrew. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. The commentators say that when he says, what is to be the rule for the boy's life and work? That the Hebrew word there for a rule is mishpat. Mishpat means judgment, justice, or way of life. So the literal translation of the question then is, when your words are fulfilled, what is to be the mishpat of the boy's life and work? What is to be the judgment? What is to be the justice? What is to be the way of life of his life and his work. Now, the reason that's interesting is because the Hebrew word for judge, which Samson will be called a judge, the Hebrew word for judge is shofet. Shofet comes from the same Hebrew word as mishpat. They're both derivatives of the same root. So, as the judge, what is to be his rule? What is to be his way of life? How is it he should live? And the angel responds. The angel answered, "Your wife must do all that I have told her." Now, it's interesting. Manoah is asking about the son so that he and his wife can help train the son. And the angel responds, "It's just what I told your wife." And then the instruction he gives are centered about the wife's role. Look what he says. Your wife must do all that I told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or other fermented drink, nor eat anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her. Now, what did that include? Raising the son as a Nazarite, okay, which included never cutting his hair. That becomes important for the role of Samson as we already know what the later story is going to tell us. But he says, your wife is to do, like I told her, in preparing for this pregnancy, so that your son will be a Nazarite from birth. And then raise him as a Nazarite, that is, not giving him anything from the grapevine, not allowing him to defile himself, and not cutting his hair. She must do everything I have commanded her. Again, this was instructions, though, to the wife. Manoah's prayer, let him come to us and tell us. God answers prayer by sending the angel to the wife. The wife gets Manoah. Manoah asks, how should we raise him? And the instructions are given to the wife. Manoah said to the angel, we would like for you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you. Now that would be the hospitable thing to do for a visitor. Again, they're not seeing him as an angel, they're seeing him as a man. And the hospitable thing would be to take an animal and slaughter it and cook it and provide a meal for this visitor. So he said, we'd like for you to stay. We'd like to show you our hospitality. The angel of the Lord replied, even though you detain me, I will not eat your food. He says, no thanks. I'm not going to eat your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord. But if you're going to slaughter an animal, if you're going to cook an animal for a meal, rather than offering it as a meal, why don't you offer it as a burnt offering to Yahweh? Manoah did not realize that it was an angel of the Lord. Again, Manoah still thought it was a man. Maybe a man of God, maybe a man carrying God's message, but he still thought of him as a man. And the man says, the angel, who appears to be a man, says, why don't you offer this as a burnt offering to Yahweh? Then Manoah inquired of the angel of the Lord, what is your name, so that we may honor you when your word comes true? He replied, you may ask my name. Why do you ask my name? It is beyond your understanding. Then Manoah took the young goat together with the grain offering and sacrificed it on the rock to the Lord. The Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. As the flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended into the flame. So, an encounter with Manoah and his wife. They realize he's an angel. They thought he was a prophet of God. They realized he was an angel as they made this offering. But this gives us the background for the birth of Samson. He was to be a Nazarite from his birth. His mother was to follow the Nazarite vow even as she was carrying him in her womb, so that he would be a Nazarite from birth. And of course, like I said, the prescription of the prohibition of the Nazarite vow about cutting of hair will become a very key part of the whole story of Samson later. Well, down to verse 14. The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. Now, the name Samson comes from the word son, and some suggest that this could be called the Son Man, or maybe more symbolically, the strong man. And of course, we know that is prophetic. She named him Samson, the strong man. He grew, and Yahweh blessed him. She followed the instructions. She did exactly as the angel had told her. She gave birth to his son, and he grew, and Yahweh blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him when he was in Manadan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. In other words, living there in that tribal area of Dan, he grew as a child in this home, and God, Yahweh, blessed him and stirred him and was in him, was living in him. What did they tell him growing up about the angel's message, the angel's prophecy? What did he know? God, obviously, to treat him as a Nazarite, for him to live under the prohibitions of the Nazarite vow. He would be living differently than other children. And his parents have raised him, but it was Yahweh who was in him and stirred him and blessed him. Well, setting for the next lesson. But what does this lesson say to us? Takeaways from this lesson. God has a plan. He always has a plan. He had a plan for Israel. He, out of his grace, was going to respond to their prayers and deliver them from the Philistines. He has a plan. To accomplish his plan, raise up Samson, he needed to work through people. And again, we see God using an unlikely one, a lady who was disgraced, an unnamed lady who was living in disgrace because she couldn't give her husband a son. And God uses her because she's willing. She's open. The angel appears to her and gives her the promise, you're going to have a son, but gives her the instructions, and she's faithful. God has a plan, and he uses parents to raise up a son. And it's interesting that even Manoah, who asked, what do we need to do? How is it can we accomplish God's plan? And as I said, I've got to believe that they were faithful and instructing Samson as he was growing up. And as they were faithful to be used of God to raise up this son according to the way God had asked them to, and instruct him, God is accomplishing his plan. And we'll see in another lesson how God accomplishes his plan through Samson. But remember, it took Manoah and his wife, an unnamed lady. But God is using people, unlikely people, who are willing to be open and to respond and to obey. God will use them to accomplish his will through them. Maybe not that Manoah was the deliverer, but that it would be his son that Manoah and his wife would raise to be God's judge, deliverer of the people of Israel. This week, we want to be sensitive to see what God is doing and wants to do in our lives if we will be open. Our prayer should be that his will would be accomplished in us and through us. But for that prayer to be fulfilled, we've got to be open and responsive. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your call on our lives. We realize you have a call on each of us. We realize that you have a plan for each of us. And so at this time, we open ourselves to you, and we would ask that you would work in us and through us to accomplish your plan. Help us that we would be faithful to pass our relationship with you on to another generation. Help us that we would be faithful to train up a new generation in the fear and admonition of Yahweh. Father, for what you have done for us and you are going to do through us as we open ourselves to you, we thank you and praise you. And our prayer is the prayer that Jesus taught us. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in and through us. Amen. Thank you.